However, that would change when, under Sutter's land, Marshall found gold, and the gold rush was on. Several 100,000 men flocked in through the Golden Gate, spread throughout California, and this is California's first football team. They spread into the foothills of the Sierra and then up north. And they later on would wash down the Sierra, which would eventually silt in the San Francisco Bay, destroying most of the marine life, as well as the important fishing runs. California became a state in 1850. In 1851, President Millard Fillmore and Congress appropriated $100,000 to treat with California tribes for purposes of quieting their aboriginal title to the lands of California. The only legal instrument the federal government had to take land and quiet the title was treaty. Between 1778 and 1869, there were about 389 treaties were negotiated, 371 were ratified by the Senate, signed into law by the President of the United States. The remaining 18 unratified treaties, when they went back to Washington, D.C., the newly elected senators argued that Indians of California should get nothing. But the treaties that were negotiated with 3 commissioners, the commissioners divided up the state into 18 districts. 8.5 million acres of land was to be set aside for the Indians. And as I said, when these treaties went back to Washington, D.C., the senators argued that Indians should get nothing, and the warfare continued. As here's an older picture of Peter Hartman Burnett, and he said that a war of extermination will continue to be waged between the races until the Indian race becomes extinct. Must be expected. As the warfare is continuing, Indians around Mission San Jose are still being baptized at the missions. And here we see Ambrosia Bonocco and Evelina Carnates. They were members of the Verona Band community. There was revitalization going on with the various California tribes. The Kuksu was an important organized religion amongst the Central California tribes. This was a dance regalia that was collected in the 1840s and is in Russia. And this is a high lineage ceremonial regalia collected in 1847 from Contra Costa County. Because of the death and the destruction of the lifeways of the Paiutes in Nevada, a series of prophets emerged that formulated what anthropologists and others have called the ghost dance religion, which was a melding of Christian and Indian beliefs. They revitalized their songs, dances, regalia, and belief system with Christian elements. And it went throughout California and ended up at Pleasanton. And as Dr. Panish said, it was actually exported from Pleasanton to the neighboring Miwoks, the Maidus of the Sacramento Valley, and the Coast Miwoks up in Marin. In the 1880s, there was an Indian Offenses Act that basically outlawed Indian religion that dealt with the confiscation of the various regalias and imprisonment for up to 30 days. This is, even though this is Central Valley, the Muwekma elders talk about these are the kinds of regalia that were worn up in San Leandro and at Pleasanton. They revitalized their dance houses, their prayer houses, which are in Ohlone language is called the Tupantak. Some of the Indian kids could go to school. This is in Niles, 1891, for the Nichols children. And their mother, Susie Nichols, was one of the cultural consultants for John Peabody Harrington. Senator George Hearst and Phoebe Ackerson Hearst, his wife, tired of living in San Francisco, bought 1,900 acres of the East Bay near Pleasanton. And it was Phoebe Hearst who funded the anthropology department and invited Alfred Kroeber to interview the Indians living at Alisal Rancheria, next to her property. So Kroba comes down in 1904 and would be joined by other colleagues from Berkeley. And here is part of his field notebook where he identifies Jose Guzman, Angela Colos, and Magdalena Armija. We will follow these people again. So the tribe partially appears on the 1900 Indian census for Niles, the rancheria there, and also on the Alisal Rancheria. There's Angela Colos and her grandson, Joseph Garcia. And I mentioned Paula because Paula shows up as the godmother for this woman who died. This is Avelina Cornetes Marin. She marries a man named Rafael Marin, and she is the kind of the founding grandmother, if you will, of the Marin lineage. She had lots of children, but she died in 1904, and that's her in the lower left-hand corner, who was baptized in 1864 at Mission San Jose. She was buried in the Ohlone Indian Cemetery. So on the right here is Paula, Maria Trinidad Reyes Gonzalez, who's a linguistic consultant, and then on the Niles Rancheria, George Santos and his wife, Pellegrina Pinos. Sorry, let's keep going. Let me make sure I'm getting this right. Yeah. So there was a man in San Jose named Charles E. Kelsey, who belonged to a philanthropic group called the Northern California Indian Association, and they were concerned about the dying Indians of California and the landless Indians of California. In 1904, he went to Washington, D.C. to the 58th Congress and submitted a memorial that showed the location of the greatly reduced but still extant Indian communities. He included Pleasanton and Niles Rancheria. While he was back there, he and a clerk discovered, sealed under secrecy of the United States Senate with the 18 unratified treaties, the Senate voted to remove the seal, and they found that, to their shock, that the United States government recognized the ownership of California belonging to the California Indians. The problem was they were not U.S. citizens. They had no rights. But Kelsey is named Special Indian Agent, and he is charged for 1905-1906 to conduct a special Indian census. So in the National Archives, we pulled out his census, which was also published by Berkeley. So here again, a partial census. There's Jose Guzman, Angela Colos, Magdalena Armija, and George Santos. While these families are falling under the jurisdiction, the Indian children are dying of starvation. This is one of the Santos children, George Santos's children, who passes away and is buried at the Indian Cemetery, Mission San Jose. Another, Jose Guzman's first family, his son, Ben Luis Guzman, he's buried at the Mission Cemetery. He's hit by a train, and he is listed as Indian, buried at Mission San Jose. Well, although there are deaths, there's still births going on, and this is Lawrence Nichols, born in Niles, and he's listed as Indian, baptized at Mission San Jose. So the mission knew that. So there was efforts after Kelsey becomes Special Indian Agent, where people are writing to both this fellow Larrabee and the President of the United States. And Larrabee writes to the President, it is believed that Congress realizes this fully, and if the money which has already been appropriated is insufficient to give every landless Indian a place which he may call his own, that later will be grant an additional appropriation for their benefit, which Congress did. It is the intention of the office to persist in the work that is now going on until every Indian has been cared for. And while it is impossible to undo all that is past and restore the original owners of the soil to their possessions, the Congress will be asked from time to time, if necessary, to deem as what is reasonable and enable the homeless Indians to have a fair start in life, even at this late day. So there is efforts. The President knows this. The Bureau of Indian Affairs knows this. Congress is appropriating monies. So as the tribe is waiting for any type of interaction with the Bureau, they appear at Indian Town. This is the Alisal Rancheria again, a partial census. There we see Catherine Peralta, which is Jose Guzman's granddaughter, who was married to Dario Marin, his sister Mercedes Marin, and Albert Marin, who is Monica Arellano's grandfather and her great-grandmother, Mercedes Marin. And we saw Trinidad Gonzalez earlier in the photo. This is Monica's grandfather on the right, and this is his uncle, Dario Marin. And he and Dario Marin and his wife, Catherine Peralta, were the last to live on the Alisal Rancheria when the houses were burnt down by Western Pacific Railroad in 1916. So Congressman Raker from California is asking questions about what has been provided for the Indians of California. And so Kelsey is asked to respond. And around 122 tribes signed on those 18 treaties. You can see Muwekma territory on the right. They presumably would have been pushed inland to one of the rancherias or the lands that was set aside, but that never happened. So Kelsey further responds, since none of the treaties mentioned in the Senate document were ever ratified, the government took everything ceded in the treaties and more. For example, the reservations and paid nothing. Absolutely no steps or measures have been taken to extinguish the rights of the tribes to the lands described in the treaties unratified in any way, shape, or form. And then he writes at the end, the Indian office didn't even have a record of the 18 treaties until we dug them out of the secret archives of the Senate. So I'm not making any of this stuff up. So he produced a map of California in 1913, which was published by Carlisle Indian School in Pennsylvania. And you can see Alameda, and below Alameda is 30, was the estimated population. And on the right-hand side, you'll see Indian Rancheria. So the Indian Rancheria was recognized. Another brilliant anthropologist from Berkeley, Edward Gifford, interviewed Angelo Colos in 1914. This is from his handwritten works, field work, and you can see at the bottom, Muwekma, meaning the gente, the people. Grover had already published in 1910 the word Muwekma, meaning the people. So the jurisdiction fell to the Reno Agency under a guy named Charles Asbury after Kelsey retired. He was $18,000 in debt out of his own pocket trying to buy land for Indians. And you can see the Verona Band is listed on the right-hand side. As they're waiting for land purchase, 7 Muwekma men enlisted in the armed forces of the Army, Navy, and the Marine Corps as early as 1914, and they stay in the armed services until 1920. They serve overseas in France, and one is severely wounded, who's in the Marine Corps, Franklin Guzman. So by 1923, there's an annual report out of the Reno Agency, and it shows the landless tribes under his jurisdiction, the Reno Agency. We see the San Benito is the Amamutsun, Monterey the Esselen Nation people, and Alameda Verona 30. And no one told the tribe they were called the Verona Band of Alameda County. Citizenship comes about in 1924. I originally thought because 17,000 Indians served overseas in World War I. When they come back, they're technically not citizens. They had applied for citizenship. But it was the Osage that was successful. And if you read The Killers of the Flower Moon, it's about the murder of the Osage in Oklahoma. So Kroeber, a year after passage, writes, the Coast-Known group is extinct for all practical purposes in his famous handbook. And then Muwekmas are still dying, 1925. Here's Martin Guzman, son of Jose Guzman. He's buried at Mission San Jose Ohlone Cemetery.